Hello students, in this lesson we're going to analyze my favorite chess game played by my favorite chess player of all times. And I'm going to tell you in a moment why I feel that way, but more than that, I wanted to teach you a few things that you should be doing whenever you review a game on your own. And that's exactly how I want to start this lesson. We're going to review this game from the very beginning until the end. It's only 22 moves, but I wanted to start by teaching you one of the things that I really think you should do whenever you're doing this on your own. If you're reviewing a game from a magazine or a book, they're going to be showing you the moves, but at some point, they're going to show you a diagram that looks like this. So this is going to be a critical position of the game that I want you to look at and analyze before you go on. So something that I've been doing for many years is I first look at this position. So you're going to look at the game, you're going to look at that diagram. And what I like to do is either set it on the board or look at it before I go through the first moves and try to analyze that position. So that's what we're going to be doing here. This is the critical moment of the game that we're going to analyze. And I want you to come up with 3 candidate moves. And this is exactly what Capablanca did in this game. He got to this position and he said, okay, this is a critical moment. I need to calculate. And he looked at 3 candidate moves. And once you have those candidate moves, and by the way, these are moves that you think are worth looking into. These are moves that you think might be good potential moves that you're going to do next. And I know that you also might be thinking, okay, how do I know when I get to a critical position? Well, that's something you're going to develop. The more you play, the more experience you get, it's going to be easy for you to know when you get into a critical position. And when you look at those candidate moves, let's say you look at 3 potential moves here. You're going to calculate one, then calculate the other one, then the other one, and you're going to compare the final positions that you get out of those variations. And of course, you're going to do the one that you like the most. So here, try to pause the video and come up with 3 candidate moves. And then we're going to see if one of your candidate moves is actually the one that Capablanca did in this position. So now that we got that done, there are a few other things I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you as we start going through the game. Now, the reason why this game is my favorite game is because this game is only 22 moves, and you're going to see how Capablanca teaches us a lot about strategy, positional play, but he also has time to finish the game with a brilliant tactical combination. And I really like Capablanca, guys, because this is a player that there's no doubt he's one of the best players ever. He's the 3rd world champion, but I really like his style. You're going to see that in many of his games, he starts by getting small strategic advantages and he starts getting a better position, and then he finishes his opponent with a simple tactic. And that's, to me, that's really brilliant. And then another reason why I think I like Capablanca so much is because he is from Cuba, just like myself. And anyone who grows up in Cuba learning chess, you're going to have a lot of exposure to Capablanca. And when you have that kind of exposure and you realize how good he was, of course, chances are that he's going to become your favorite, or at least one of your favorite chess players of all time. So now it's time to go over the game, and this game started with the moves pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now bishop b5. You should know at this point in the course, this is the Ruy Lopez or the Spanish opening. And after bishop b5, the black pieces just went knight f6. I'm not going to go over the basics of this opening, guys. We did that many lessons ago. But just know that this idea of taking on c6 followed by knight e5 is not going to be that effective. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because this is another tip that we're going to be using here. I want to see if you can calculate this move that I'm mentioning, these lines, without moving the pieces. So I know it's going to be annoying, it's going to become blurry, but let's give it a try. So imagine this bishop taking on c6, pawn takes on c6, knight takes e5, and then queen d4 is attacking the knight and the pawn. And that's why this variation is not that effective, because the queen is going to come and get either the knight or the pawn back. And guys, trust me, if you get used to doing this, at the beginning it's going to be annoying, it's going to be tiring, but the more you do it, the better you're going to get and you're going to improve your visualization. So basically this is what we talked about. Bishop takes, pawn takes, if the knight takes, queen d4 with a fork. When you move, they're going to take on e4, right? So in this game, Capablanca actually, after knight f6, he just castled, and now pawn to d6, and look at this. After pawn d6, we have an absolute pin. And we should know by now that whenever there is a pin, we want to add more pressure to the pinned piece. And of course, right now we cannot add more pressure. This knight cannot go to d4, he cannot go to e5, but Capablanca did pawn to d4. So he's striking the center, he's threatening to go to d5, that knight is pinned. And if the black pieces take, then our knight is going to come to d4 to put more pressure. Now, in this game, the black pieces simply did bishop d7, there's no pin anymore. Then knight to c3, very simple, just developing his pieces. Bishop e7, and now rook to e1. So notice how that rook came from the corner to one of the central files. At this point, we're almost done with the opening. Notice how we have developed the minor pieces, we have castled for the white pieces, the black pieces are about to castle, and it has been already 7 moves. At this point in the game, the black pieces finally took on d4, and I wanted to do the following. In this position, if the black didn't take on d4, if they did something like castling, they're falling into a very well-known trap, which is called the Tarrasch trap. And I'm going to show you how it works, but I'm going to show you it by doing it in our head. We're going to try again, and I know you're not gonna like this part, but we're gonna try to do it in our head. And I'm not gonna do the whole thing, but just for the first few moves, let's try to do it by visualizing it. So this is what we do. If they had castled, this is not what happened in the game, but if they had castled, this is what we do. We're gonna go bishop c6, bishop takes on c6, then pawn takes on e5, pawn takes on e5, queen d8, rook takes back, and then knight takes e5. Now, when I do it one more time, I know this is extremely blurry. I'm going to try not to use the arrows. So again, bishop takes e6, bishop takes e6. So try to follow that in your head. Then pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, queen takes queen, then this rook takes a queen, and knight takes on e5. So I'm going to do it on the board now, and let's see if this is the position that you visualize. So bishop takes knight, bishop takes back, pawn takes, queen takes, rook takes, and then knight takes on e5. Now, this is not the trap in itself, there's more to it, but I didn't want you to get too tired. Now, at this point, this is what happens. The black pieces are going to try to take advantage of the back rank. So they take this pawn that is defended by 2 pieces because they know that after knight takes, we cannot collect it. They'll have this checkmate on d1. However, this is the move that Tarrasch found. Knight d3, blocking the rook, and now we have a skewer. So they're going to try to keep that knight on e4, but we could easily now attack it with the pawn. Then bishop c5, look at this, all of this is forced. After bishop c5, we take the bishop, of course, knight takes, and now bishop g5, and we're going to get an exchange at least. We're attacking the rook. If the rook moves anywhere, we're going to do bishop e7, and we either get the knight or we get that rook. So this was like 9 moves, guys, that Tarrasch prepared. So if you fall for this, you're done. And it's hard to actually see these 9 moves ahead. So anyways, going back here, the black pieces, of course, did not castle. They just took. And after knight takes, queen takes on d4. Very nice place for the queen now. She cannot be attacked by the knight, and she is controlling almost the entire board from this square. Then bishop takes b5, knight takes b5, and castle. Okay, guys, so everything that happens from this point on is the reason why I wanted to memorize this game, is the reason why I wanted to recreate it. So when I first came across this game many years ago, I liked it so much that I memorized it, and I wanted to recreate it every time. Of course, it never happened. I never recreated this game, but many of the ideas that I learned here, I was able to use them in other positions. So what I want from you here is I want you to try to come up with the next move. And you could do the same thing we did at the beginning. Try to come up with 3 candidate moves, and maybe one of those moves is the one that Capablanca did in this position. I hope you did not come up with this move. Knight e7 is already getting you in trouble, because the only defender now is going to be attacked, and now that knight is going to be captured. If you try to hold on to it, you're getting yourself pinned, so queen b8 is going to get the knight. So let me go back here, and the move that Capablanca did here is a move that I really liked. It's a move that shows you how well he understood all of this concept of strategy and positional play. he actually went queen to c3. Now, queen to c3 apparently is just putting pressure on c7, but there's much more to it. First of all, this queen is now making this square available for the knight. This knight wants to go from the queen side to the king side. And notice how the light squares bishop of the black pieces is gone. So f5 now is going to be very attractive for the white pieces. But after the black pieces go pawn to c6 to prevent us from taking that pawn, notice what's happening to this pawn. At this point in the course, you should know what happens to that pawn. That pawn is now weak. He cannot be defended by another pawn. So we're going to start targeting that pawn. And notice how that knight from b5 is going to go to its related square. And we call this a related square because that's a square that the knight could easily get to in 2 moves. And this is a very powerful concept. So this knight from here could go knight d4, and just like that, he's going to go to f5. So knight d4, knight d7, knight f5, from b5 to f5 in just 2 moves. And now, not only is the knight putting pressure on d6, on e7, the white pieces are now threatening to do queen g7 checkmate. Now, after bishop f6, of course, preventing that checkmate, the white pieces also transferred the queen from the queen side to the king side. So queen g3, we're directly putting pressure on the king, and we're putting pressure on the weak pawn. And you're going to see how the entire game now revolves around that weakness that the black pieces created. So it's as simple as that, and this is what I mentioned before. Capablanca was able to create a strategic weakness, a positional weakness, and then he's going to try to use that to get the black pieces into an inferior position, and then he's going to finish them off with a tactic. So after 95, it is time to develop this bishop, and I want to see if you could pause the video and come up with the best square for that bishop. Well, of course, the move here is bishop f4. So now we have the knight, the bishop, and the queen indirectly putting pressure on that pawn. I know the knight is in the way, but this kind of pressure is just too powerful even though the knight's there. So after bishop f4, queen c7, this is a pretty bad move because they're getting the queen on this diagonal that we're putting so much pressure on. Now guys, time to develop the only piece we haven't used, which is the rook. And it is very natural to just get the rook to the same eye-open file. Now, rook a to d8, and this is exactly the same position we had at the very beginning. So have your candidate moves ready. If you want, you could reevaluate the position and see if you come up with a different candidate move. So maybe now that you looked at the game from the very beginning, maybe you come up with a different idea. Here, the move that Capablanca did was actually rook to d6. And I know you're not going to like this either, but let's try to do it in our head. So what happens after rook d6? Well, after rook d6, the black pieces take on d6, and now we have bishop e5. You see how this battery is now coming handy. So again, rook takes pawn, and now after bishop e5, we're pinning that rook, and if the bishop takes, we're going to do queen takes, again putting pressure on the rook, which is pinned, but also threatening checkmate. Alright, so I know that was blurry. Let's do it one more time. Rook takes pawn, rook takes rook. So we gave up the rook, but then we get the knight, right? And we're guaranteed to get that other rook. Or if he takes, the queen takes back, also putting pressure on the rook and trying to do checkmate. So let me do it on the board right now. So rook takes, bishop takes, there's a pin, and if the bishop takes, we get that bishop, threatening checkmate and threatening to get the rook, and we're going to be up at knight. A move like this, of course, it doesn't make any sense because we get the queen, right? So going back here, let me show you what happened in the actual game. After the bishop took on e5, let me actually go back. So rook takes, bishop takes e5. At this point, the black pieces did this move, rook to d1. So they don't really mind it if we get that queen because they're going to checkmate us on e1. But at this point, after we take the rook and they did bishop e5, there's a brilliant continuation here. So pause the video now, take as long as you need, and see if you can find a forcing continuation to either do checkmate or win significant material. Alright, so the move goes like this. So knight h6, that's a forcing move. The king has to go to h8. Then queen takes, and we're pinning that pawn, so he cannot even take the knight. Plus, we're attacking the queen. So again, knight h6, king h8, queen e5. But then, what do we do if the queen takes the queen? if you want, pause the video now and try to figure out from here without moving the pieces, or let's move the pieces on the board. Then king moves, we take on e5. How do we finish this after the queen takes? Well, very simple, guys. At this point, you should be able to see how if the knight takes on f7, that's a fork. And if they don't take, let's say they move the king, well, we get the queen and we're winning by a knight and also by pawns. But if they accept it, then we have checkmate on the back rank. So he goes down, we take, and that's checkmate. All right, guys, so I don't know if you agree with me, but to me, the first time I looked at this game, I had to go over again and again and again because I really liked the way Capablanca played it. So I don't know if you feel the same way I do, but there's no doubt that this is a game that everyone has to review at some point in their life. There's a lot to learn from it. And before I let you go, there's one more thing I wanted to say. Sometimes, and this is the last tip I wanted to give you, sometimes it is a good idea to review the games in a different fashion. Instead of doing what I did, like just reviewing the games one move at a time, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, you should try reviewing them 2 by 2 or 3 by 3. And what that means is the following. You're going to read the moves and just follow them in your head. So visualize that position. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. So visualize that position and only then you do it on the board, you see? Then you go over the next two moves in your head, and once you visualize it, you do it on the board. And if you get really good at this, then you could do 3 by 3, 4 by 4, but trust me, if you do this consistently, not for every game, but you do it from time to time, you're going to get really good at calculation and visualization. It is tiring, it is annoying, but that's going to help you. So with that said, guys, like always, let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you next time.